It is my pleasure to welcome you to this meeting organized by the Secretariat of the Global Judicial Integrity Network, based in the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime in Vienna. My name is Roberta Solis, and I'm the Judicial Integrity Team Leader. It is my honor to moderate this session, and I'm delighted to be joined here by a very distinguished panel of experts who I will now introduce. First, we have Judge Hyung-Do Kim, who is a presiding judge of the Seoul High Court and has served as the Secretary General of the Judicial Information Technology Long-Term Planning Committee for the Supreme Court of the Republic of Korea. He specializes in comparative law, intellectual property, and bankruptcy, and is an early adopter of remote video conference technology at litigation hearings. We also have Professor Jane Johnston, who is an associate professor in the School of Communication and Arts at the University of Queensland, Australia. She has researched and published extensively on public relations, communication and justice, and media diversity and change, most recently examining how social media has impacted on practice in these fields. We also have Judge Andreea Chis, who is a member of the Superior Council of Magistracy in Romania and a PhD lecturer at the Faculty of Law of Babes Bolyai University. As a board member of the European Network of Councils for the Judiciary, she coordinated a project titled Public Confidence and the Image of the Justice over 2 years of implementation. The final reports of this project are available on the Pathable page for this session and on the website of the Global Judicial Integrity Network. And finally, we have Judge Mark Bax, who is a senior judge and one of 5 press judges in the District Court of Limburg in the Netherlands. He specializes in criminal law and has previously served as a criminal defense lawyer. He provides media training for the judges in the Court of Limburg, as well as the training of new judges in the Department of Criminal Law. The Global Judicial Integrity Network is a platform that creates opportunities for judges and judiciaries to connect and engage in dialogue on the topic of judicial integrity, address pertinent judicial integrity related issues, and share resources and experiences. Along with a judicial ethics training package, the network has produced several knowledge products, including the non-binding guidelines on the use of social media. In its current work plan, the network is providing guidance on topics including judicial immunities, the use of artificial intelligence by judiciaries, and judicial transparency and open justice. The network is a component of the UNODC Global Program for the implementation of the Doha Declaration, generously supported by the State of Qatar. This session is titled Transparency Techniques to Strengthen the Resilience of the Judiciary, and it comes under the conference thematic stream Defending the Truth. This theme motivates us to explore the linkages between misinformation and corruption. Thus, our session will explore several strategies for how the judiciary manages information and communicates with the public, and how the judiciary and the media can work hand in hand, reinforcing each other's work to ensure that truth continues to reach the public and counters any media environment prone to the spread of misinformation, whether it is unintentional or intentional. Judges can play an important role in fostering public's understanding of the law and the openness of the justice system. This ability, however, is sometimes limited in the ethical obligations of judges. Judges are expected to uphold their personal and institutional independence and to conduct their affairs in an impartial and unbiased manner. This impartiality should exist in fact and in the perception of the public. For example, significant attention has been devoted to the questions of whether, when, and how judges can participate in discourse outside the courtroom, including in the network's own guidance on the use of social media. To identify our audience today's attitudes and views on this point, we have created a poll on the platform being used for this meeting that we invite you to participate in. Please locate the poll window and provide an answer to this question. The question is, a judge is under heavy public criticism for his role as the presiding judge in a corruption case against a popular mayor. The mayor's supporters have called the case a sham orchestrated by the nation's wealthy elite. Peaceful but tense protests have occurred daily outside the courtroom. Should the court conduct a nationally televised press conference seeking to ease tensions in the public? We have already received some answers, and we thank you for voting in the poll. So while your answers here could easily change with the adjustment of a few facts, there are some ethical considerations which the court should consider before making this decision. These considerations can be found mostly in the UN Basic Principles on the Independence of the Judiciary and in the Bangalore Principles of Judicial Conduct and its commentary. In particular, ethical breaches may arise if judges themselves participate in discussions regarding active or pending cases. In addition, external pressure to answer questions about a case may compromise the judge's independence. And while judges have the right, like all persons, to freedom of expression, judges must also conduct themselves in such a manner as to preserve the dignity of their office and the impartiality and independence of the judiciary. Guidance also exists as to the method of response. Judges should refrain from answering criticism of the media or the public by writing to the press or making incidental comments, as the judge's opinion and reasoning is generally expressed in the official judgment. If the media misreports on court matters and the judge considers that the error should be corrected, the registrar may issue a press release to state the factual position or take steps for an appropriate correction to be made. These are all guidance provided by the UN Basic Principles on the Independence of the Judiciary and the Bangalore Principles of Judicial Conduct. However, it's worth noting that both documents were drafted some decades ago under a different context and even different channels for communications with the public. In any case, under these conditions and existing guidance, it seems the options for judges and judiciaries are quite narrow, and they are not well positioned to face all the challenges of a communicative nature. This may have grave consequences, as throughout the world, judges may face serious tension with other branches of government and must weather political attacks, which are often damaging to the reputation and standing of the judiciary, if not also leading to physically violent acts against judges. Even in day-to-day matters, there is a strong public interest in ensuring that judicial communication is timely, clear, and effective. But placing this burden entirely on judges themselves may result in delays to cases while forcing judges into precarious ethical positions. So, must judges then simply grin and bear it in all instances of public attack? Who can help the judge communicate accurate information about specific cases or the judicial system as a whole? So with this context in place, I would like to pose the first question for all of the panelists to answer. Again, we ask that the participants, the attendees, use the chat function to address questions for the panelists. And if time permits, at the end of the panel, we are gonna answer some of these questions. So the first round of questions for all of the panelists is the following. What do you see as the main challenges to judges with respect to mass information and media coverage of the courts? What are the consequences if judiciaries are not prepared for the task of managing and responding to misinformation, whether it is intentional or not? And what solutions do you propose? So I will pass the floor first to Judge Hyung-Doo Kim of South Korea. Judge Kim, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. First of all, I'd like to say that it is a great honor for me to be here as a speaker. The increase in threats against judges and judiciaries are getting bigger and bigger problems in Korea, like other countries. Mass media and social media are becoming the cause of those problems. The judiciary of Korea is trying to solve those problems by enhancing transparency of judicial proceedings and promoting open access to the information of the court. I use the sharing screen function now.
Okay, very good.
Yeah, it's okay. My first take is the electronic litigation system in Korea. E-litigation was first introduced in 2010 in Korea. In the beginning, e-litigation was only available for patent cases, but gradually it extended to other areas like civil cases and administrative cases and insolvency cases. E-litigation is not mandatory for parties, but the percentage of the e-filing has increased rapidly. In 2018, almost 80% of civil cases were filed by e-filing system. The reason of this increase is that electronic litigation is easy, fast, and economical. Electronic litigation system has greatly improved efficiency, transparency, and accessibility of the Korean courts. In 2018, Korea was #1 in the world in the matter of enforcing business contracts by the evaluation of World Bank. The main reason of this great success was the transparent court proceedings by using electronic litigation system. By using electronic litigation system, documents and evidence submitted by parties are immediately shown on the electronic record viewer, like this. And the electronic record viewer is shared by all the parties and judges. The official documents of the courts are also shown on the electronic record viewer. Once those documents are submitted, nobody can change them. Afterwards, the parties of the case can view all the documents and evidence at any time with the electronic record viewer on the e-filing homepage. Parties can use electronic litigation system via mobile phones. Next, the Korean judges use electronic case management system every day. The judges get automatic notification of certain events. For example, when a case remains unsolved for a certain long period, or when the deadline set in the order is over, electronic case management system send automatic notification to the judges. COVID-19. When a face-to-face trial was not possible due to COVID-19, Korean judges did remote video conference trials by using web cameras, microphone, internet communication. Comprehensive legal information system. The Supreme Court of Korea developed the comprehensive legal information system. The system is available to the public as well as judges via the public website of the court. The website offers various legal information about relevant court decisions, legislations, and regulations, thesis, judicial reviews, and an open judgment service. Anyone can access to almost all judgments of courts, including lower courts. Anyone can search the judgments by using random words. The range of judgments that can be searched on the internet is getting wider. But the obstacles to disclosing judgments are the need to protect privacy. The judgments provided to the public are redacted to protect personal information. The Sentencing Commission of Korea was established in 2007. Since its establishment, the Sentencing Commission has been continuously performing the task of establishing and amending the sentencing guidelines. The goal of the Commission is the realization of transparent and predictable sentences by establishing reasonable sentencing guidelines based on public consensus. According to the sentencing guidelines, when a judge decides not to follow the sentencing guidelines, the judge should write the reason in the judgment. So it may contribute to the prediction of judgments and transparency of the judiciary. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Judge Kim, for this very interesting experience of the Korean judiciary. We'll make sure to come back to you with a few follow-up questions after the other speakers. I will now pass the floor to Professor Jane Johnston for your remarks. Jane, I'm sorry, but you're muted.
Sorry, thank you. Is that all good? Can you hear me now?
Yes, all
thank
good, yeah.
Thank you, Roberta, for your introduction and for inviting me today at this very brisk hour of the morning at 1 a.m. in Australia. So thank you for the question. There's actually three parts to the question. So let me consider these in turn, and I will put up a few slides partway into my response. I think there are several, well, first, the main question, or the first question that looks at challenges to judges with respect to mass information and media coverage of the courts. This has, I guess, been my main area of research for 20 years. I think there are several main challenges when we look at the broader disrupted media ecology. The first one is the ubiquity and the lack of control of the current media. So journalists were once the sole reporters of courts, but by and large, but they're no longer the only ones who publish. Now everyone can publish. And journalists were generally trained in contempt and defamation and privacy laws, and that's part of what I do at university. They knew what they could publish and what they shouldn't publish. Didn't always go by the rules, but generally speaking. There was always also some recourse with the traditional media, but media today is much more ubiquitous, and it means something quite different. It's not all the media as we knew it once upon a time from the days when I was a journalist. It's much more unwieldy, it's pervasive, and it frankly can be out of control. The second challenge, and I'm going to go to my slides here and see if I can do it seamlessly. So the second challenge is that certainly in Australia poses an ongoing challenge, is non-publication and suppression orders. So in a digital connected world, there are becoming more challenges than ever in this regard. And I use an example here in this slide of the case of Archbishop George Pell's trial in Australia for historic sexual abuse. The suppression orders led to a national and international outcry with widespread publication about how this demonstrated the relative powerlessness of local courts to enforce their orders in other jurisdictions. The story became somewhat about the suppression orders itself. In fact, the front page of one newspaper had just the whole front page that read "Censored, the world is reading a very important story that is relevant to Victorians. The Herald Sun is prevented from publishing details of this news." So that was the front page. So the story becomes a story in its own right. The third challenge then is that we live in a world and a global culture in which publishing happens fast. So I think a major challenge is the speed at which information is posted, which comes with a lack of fact checking and the echo chambers that exist in the internet. So we call this in the academy post-truth world. and it's been encouraged by some politicians, some bit more than others. It suits the agenda of some, and it puts accuracy at risk. And this is a major issue for the courts. So where relationships existed and still exist with the media, which was a positive, a challenge has emerged because this is no longer the case. It's not like judges or people in the courts know everybody that is commenting about the courts anymore. So every person can publish any time of day on many platforms and very often anonymously. There's no longer that protection where a relationship could be managed. So the second question, which is about the consequences of if the judiciary are not prepared for the task or managing and responding. Well, in a very short answer, they can get attacked by the media or by the members of the public, becoming bloggers and so forth. The justice system may be held in disrepute, and public confidence in the justice system can be impacted. So I'd like to go to a slide that allows me to respond with what I think should be done to avoid this. I think the judiciary, this should probably be one slide ahead. Yes, the judiciary should try to avoid that situation, and I think the judiciary needs critical digital media literacy training. I think this is the case for all professional bodies in the world. We know that politicians are well trained in working with the media and increasingly are becoming trained in working in social media. That doesn't mean everybody has to set up a Facebook account, but understanding and having some control over the digital media environment, or at least being aware of how it works, is very important. It allows you to be prepared. You certainly can't mitigate every possible challenge, of course, but you can mitigate errors that are due to either ignorance, such as on privacy settings, or getting caught up in commentary. The general rule of thumb is to politely correct errors and leave it at that. This calls for the need for professional development where all the judiciary are involved annually. I'm working with a judicial body in Australia, and I'm actually suggesting digital media training through a communication and media consultancy. To the best of my knowledge, as I said, this type of training happens with other industries and disciplines, but not with judges. So it's not just about managing your digital footprint, but also about knowing the language and culture of media, because let's face it, it might be part of the next court case any judge hears. And this leads me to the third question: what are the solutions? Well, these are summarised on the next slide. I've flagged already digital media literacy and training. This includes making sure judicial guidebooks are kept up to date, relevant and read. So I know that the Australasian Institute of Judicial Administration in Australia have recently added a chapter for judges in dealing with social media. But increasingly, all organisations, sectors and institutes also need to have specialist media managers. And this is the topic I'll be talking about a little bit later in the panel today. We call these public information officers, who are very well versed in media, communication and also crisis communication. This role should work closely with the judiciary in an advisory capacity. Planning and relationship management also matter, and they can mitigate the problems. In PR, we have a concept called a trust bank, where you develop credits ahead of time, and these become currency for the bad times. So crises do happen, and differences of opinion do happen, but having the trust of the media and the community will help in the bad times. Gaining these, you can gain these by being involved in outreach and engagement, working with the news media, working with schools and associations, being seen and being known, having a profile in the community, and being an upstanding member of the community that people know, because public perception matters. We know this. I don't believe open justice can any longer rely on a passive expectation that the media will come and get your story. I think courts must act strategically and proactively to ensure that they are understood. So my current research examines storytelling from and about the courts, and I think there's a strong link here in how to mitigate and how to deal with these challenges. In the 2020s, the traditional media are only a small part of the news media. and sorry, only a small part of the new media ecosystem. So courts have come to command space in many forms across many communication platforms. And I'll provide examples of these later on, but just off the top of my head, for example, podcasts, reality programs, crime blogs, docudramas, social media now vie with traditional media for the ears and eyes of the frankly quite fickle public. So storytellers are still journalists, but they're also bloggers, social media dilettantes, public commentators, scriptwriters, court communicators, and yes, sometimes judges and other actors from the court. So I argue that it's not a case of whether courts should engage, but how, both strategically and creatively. Thank you. That's the end of my first response.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Johnston, Jane, also for raising all of these very interesting experiences. We hope to get back to a lot of what you mentioned in the next round. I will pass the floor now to Judge Andreea Chis of Romania. Andreea, you have the floor.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much, UNODC, for inviting me. I'm grateful and very honored to be here with you today. I will use my screen sharing to illustrate my answers. And because time is short, if you don't mind, I will go directly to the solutions. Using three main pieces of advices, which are, in my opinion, generally applicable for relationships, including those with the media and the general public. The first one is be the designer of your relationships. The second one, look at things from the perspective of the other side. And the third one would be original when it is needed. Jane said something about it as well. Speaking about design your relationships, I think the main challenge is building confidence in the relationship with the media and trust in the relationship with the general public through the media. Trust and confidence are not synonyms, even though we use them like that quite often. And because trust is a willingness to commit yourself to the unknown, while confidence is a willingness to commit to something that you are already familiar with. A good relationship with others, individuals, institutions, organizations, the press, etc., means a certain amount of knowledge about the other one. In other words, a previous experience, some previous contacts, such as formal or informal meetings with the representatives of other branches of government, with other legal professionals, with the press. If you know somebody personally, it becomes difficult to disrespect or to offend that person. That's the basis of confidence. Gaining the confidence of these categories can bring the trust of the general public. That also allows the judiciary to be proactive, as Jane said before, and preventive, which means to foresee the needs of the general public and choose the topics for external communication, considering or according to these needs. To respond to the first question, I think this is the main challenge, to build trust and confidence. This is a real challenge also because judges are quite reluctant to build or consolidate good relationships with the journalists, considering them sensation hunters who do not necessarily intend to reflect the truth, but to sell a story with a certain degree of novelty. Remember, the second piece of advice was understand the perspective of the other side. Misunderstandings, conflicts, crises are impossible to avoid, no matter how good your relationships are. In case of the press, misinformation is not necessarily equal with fake news or malicious intent. It could be just a different perspective. This is the reason why it is very important to understand the perspective of the other side for prevention and reaction as well. From the viewpoint of prevention, it is important to foresee what could be of the utmost importance for the press and the general public, not just particular cases such as high corruption cases, but also topics such as judicial independence, salaries or pensions of the judges, and try to explain those topics in as plain language as possible, just like explaining something to your grandmother. When forced to be reactive, especially in crisis situations, if you do not respond adequately and in due time, and now I'm answering the second question, the consequence could be the loss of confidence you gained with great difficulty and probably in a long period of time. Go to the third solution, which is find original solutions when necessary. I will say that the Romanian judiciary cooperated with lawyers and journalists, sometimes even turning conflicts into opportunities for learning and developing best practices. I illustrate this with a story about a conflict produced by a procedural incident in a court. A judge evacuated a lawyer, and even though the procedural code did not allow the measure, and this act led to a protest by lawyers reflected in the local media. Before going national, a local association of judges and prosecutors came with a solution, proposing regular meetings between judges and lawyers. And the result of these meetings was a guide of best practices between judges and lawyers, this meeting being moderated by university professors specialized in communication and matters and ethics. Everything was reflected by the press. Now we have a national guide of best practices between legal professionals adopted by the Council and the National Union of Bars. I sustain active presence of judges, especially communicators, and I speak about press judges as well, on social media. Some posts on their pages are quoted by the media, such is the case of a young judge. I give it you here. He's the spokesperson of Cluj-Napoca Lawyer Court, and he pleaded for a justice with a humane face, and the press related that. Another example, speaking about storytelling, I like that, Jane, is the example of a lady lawyer who had previously been a journalist and who related her experience in a family court, writing an article about the judge, a female judge, entitled "The Lady with the Blue Shoes." And this article had more than 5 million views till now. The press followed the solution in the case and related favorably about it. Now this lady lawyer has her own blog entitled, of course, Blue Shoes, and she writes now articles about initiatives taken by the courts in order to improve the environment for juvenile hearings. She is, of course, supported by the courts in this mission. Groups on social media could also be used for transparency in communications. For instance, we have a group of best practices between legal professionals developed under the umbrella of the Judicial Council in the framework of a communication project. And the purpose of this group is to share best practices, identify in due time the problems before escalating in conflicts, and find solutions locally if it is possible by discussions. 3 judge members of the council are also members of this group, answering questions related to the activity of the council. Courts pages on social media are valuable instruments for public education and instant dissemination of information about courts activities. ENCJ, the European Network of Councils for the Judiciary, and the UNODC have projects on individual and institutional use of social media by judges and judicial institutions. Here, I will give just one example of a law court which used very original and bold methods in this matter. Sometimes a bold use of humor can be very, very fruitful and useful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Judge Kiss, for all this very interesting experience and practical cases. We'll pass now the floor to Judge Mark Bax of the Netherlands. Judge Bax, you have the floor.
Well, thank you. And first of all, I would like to say that I find it an honor and a privilege to be part of this conference and panel discussion on such an important topic. And important it is vitally important, I think, because whether we, and I mean the judiciary, like it or not, mass information and media coverage of court proceedings are a given. There is no stopping it. And more important, we should not want to stop it because we need it. The judiciary is one of the three powers of state, and where the other two powers do have to give account for their actions, the judiciary doesn't. The judiciary is independent, and the only power that controls or should control the judiciary is not a power of state. It is, or at least it should be, another independent power, and it is the press. And it is that possibility, the possibility that the press needs to have to control us, that is of vital importance to keep our legitimacy. Think of it like this: justice must be done and must be seen to be done, and it must be understood how it's done. And it has to be seen to be believed. Then, and only then, the public can control the judicial system and can, and hopefully will keep trust in that system. And that is the general idea nowadays, the idea of court transparency, and that as a consequence of the rule of law. And I think there lies the main challenge to judges with respect to mass information and media coverage of the courts. And that challenge is that we have to be confident, that we have to have the strength, the belief and the trust in ourselves, in our colleagues and in our organizations to be fully open and verifiable, to be transparent about our work, our organization and ourselves, and that we must be so professional that we distance ourselves from colleagues who are unsound, corrupt and dishonest. And it is that mindset, that strength, that belief, that willingness that we have to have with respect to mass information and media coverage of the courts. And this has several consequences, I think, not only on a practical level. For instance, the courts have to provide the journalists with the facilities that they need for doing their job. No, it has also consequences on a more fundamental level. And one of those more fundamental consequences is that court proceedings, perhaps with exceptions regarding youth and family matters, must be open to the public and press. It also means that the judges must truly appreciate the role of the press, and that they must be fully aware of the important role of the press in a democratic society as a control mechanism on the power that is the judiciary. It furthermore means that the judges must enable the press to really control the judiciary, which means that proceedings and rulings must be easily understood and explainable, which means, and Now we come to the role of the individual judge, that a ruling must be given in words and terms that are easily understood. So no unnecessary jargon, use short sentences, make sure that the ruling has a logic and balanced structure. And if a ruling cannot be written short and simple, then let it be accompanied by a summary in simple terms. It also means that you have to have a database that is open to the public, in which all rulings, anyway those regarding criminal cases and cases regarding administrative law, and perhaps anonymized, can be looked up, and that you also have an instrument for the public and the press with which they can check out the judge. Does this judge have or have had any ties with the parties involved? Has he or she worked for one of the parties involved? Does he or she have any additional functions which make it that he or she perhaps should not try this case? Interesting discussion on the site is how far should one go in giving information on the judge? Should you disclose his political preferences and debts of his or her partner? And should you disclose whether or not he has shares and in which company? I will not go into that now, but it is something you should think about, because I think you should have a database containing information on judges available to the press and public. So to come back to the question, the main challenge to judges with respect to mass information and media coverage of the courts is to have the strength and the trust and the self-confidence to be fully open to the public and press, knowing the importance of the role of a free press in a democratic society, and to be controllable, and to be prepared to be controlled, and to be willing to be controlled. Only then can you keep your legitimacy, also in difficult times when dark powers try to undermine the power of the judiciary. And should it occur that factual misinformation is spread around, I think you should have a communications department, a communications officer, or a press judge that immediately can respond and immediately responds. In the Netherlands, the Dutch Council for the Judiciary is active on Facebook and Twitter, and all the individual courts also have a Twitter account. And that enables us to do web care, which in turn enables us to immediately respond to factual misinformation. Furthermore, we also post actively on Facebook. We post and tweet about the work of the judiciary in general, and we give press releases concerning verdicts in cases that are of interest to the public. And when those press releases are about verdicts, they also contain a hyperlink to the verdict in the public database. And I think that is of great importance. Always disclose the source of your information and let that source be open to the public. For example, if someone tweets that a judge has had professional ties with a party in a case that that judge has to try, immediately react with a link to the database containing information on that specific judge to show that it's not true, or show that it is true and react that appropriate measures will be taken. Because if you don't react, and if you're not fully open and transparent and controllable, you will lose your legitimacy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Judge Bax, for this very interesting intervention and the experience of the Dutch judiciary. It's one of the few judiciaries from our research that has actual press judges. So we hope to hear a bit more from that experience in the next round. So thank you to all of the panelists for very excellent answers and very thought-provoking interventions. We have heard a number of challenges and experiences regarding judicial relations with the media, as well as the potential solutions. So in this next round, I would like to address a follow-up question to each one of you individually. And but in this round, I will reverse the order and begin with Judge Bax. So you have now the floor again, Judge Bax. And what advice would you give to judiciaries wanting to improve their relationship with the press or other institutions, particularly in jurisdictions where the relationship between the judiciary and the media is especially tense?
My advice is loosen up. Like Judge Andrea Chris just said, it is easy to think of the press as an enemy, to think of journalists as pesky insects, always asking difficult questions, always looking for foul play. But bear in mind that you need the press, that you need journalists, and that you need that they do their work as good as they can. To keep your legitimacy, you need to be controllable and you need to be controlled. You need to be fully open so that the press can see that there are no secrets, no hidden agendas, no unlawful influences, etc. And that means, also like Judge Chris said, you better work on your relationship with the press. If you receive the press with professional courtesy and be fully open to them, be fully controllable, I think the relationship with the press will change because you give them the possibility to find out that there's nothing wrong, that there are no secrets, no hidden agendas, and that there is no foul play. So, assuming that trust in the judiciary is largely based on how proceedings are reported in the press, it is clearly important that the channels of communication between the judiciary and the media be transparent and open, and that the judiciary has to invest in its relations with the media. The judiciary is required to create the conditions necessary to enable the media to fulfill the crucial role they play in keeping the public informed. And this not only means that you should have a communications department or a press judge, it also means that you really have to work on your relationship with the press. Once a year, the Dutch Council for the Judiciary organizes a conference concerning a topic relating to the relationship between the judges and the media. And these conferences are organized primarily for press judges, communications officers, and other relevant court employees, but occasionally also journalists are invited to attend these sessions, and the focus is then primarily on how effective the relationship with the press is and what can be done to improve it. And my court, the District Court of Limburg, organizes a meeting twice a year with all local and regional journalists. And they are invited to come to the court for an informal get-together with the president and the board of the court, the members of the communication department, and the press judges. And we then show them something behind the scenes, for example, the archives or the offices. But more importantly, we talk to them. We interact with them and we talk to them on what went good and what went not so good in the past period, and what we, so the Court of Limburg, can do to improve it. Also, I'm a press judge, and all journalists who want to can reach me 24/7 by phone and email. And I also encourage them to do so. I also say, if you have any questions, please give me a call, please email me. Not that I can answer every question. Bear in mind that I can only give factual information. And it is not that my phone doesn't stop ringing, certainly not. But for them, for the press to have the opportunity is also a kind of reassurance. It shows that we are not afraid of questions, that we have nothing to hide, and that we treasure the press and the role they play in our society. A role that is, as I said before, of vital importance to us. A free and independent press is an important fundament under the legitimacy of the judiciary. So, work on your relationship with the press. Let them see you care for them and you are fully aware of the important role. Be open and don't think of them as enemies. Think of them well, not perhaps as friends, but as colleagues who also are independent and who also try to do their work as best as they can and try to give them the information that they need. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Judge Bax. And I think that transparency, as you mentioned, is really the way to also counter misinformation, because if the information is public, it's available and it's easily understandable, there isn't much of a leeway to change that. But let's hear also from the other panelists on their follow-up questions. We are also getting some questions in the chat, and we ask that all the participants use that function to send their questions. So the next question is to Judge Andrea Kies. So as a member of a judicial council, Judge Kies, could you please discuss how the leadership of a judicial council can help overcome situations which challenge public trust in the judiciary? You need to unmute yourself again, Andrea.
You know, being a professor, I used to have always the microphone, so it's difficult to understand that my mic is muted, you know. Excuse me, please. To answer the second question, and thank you for that, I have given some examples of best practices, and I did it with a purpose, namely to highlight the roots of the problems we encountered related to public trust. These problems come very rarely from an ordinary citizen. Most of them appear as reactions to declarations of politicians, members of other branches of government, or lawyers, most of them members of the bars. I also spoke about prevention before reaction, if it is possible. That's the reason for we drafted and commonly adopted guides of best practices with other branches of government, with other legal professionals, and with the press as well. It was an opportunity not just to identify common problems and propose together possible solutions, but also to literally sit at the same table and to get to know each other better, putting ourselves in the shoes of the other side, even by doing role playing, as I said before, understanding the perspective of the other side. The institutional communication proved to be useful for everybody, because we cannot build trust in institutions, in our institutions, in our legal professions, without building trust generally in institutions, as we noted in a project of ENCJ on public confidence and the image of justice adopted by the General Assembly in 2018. In this period of pandemic, as a judicial council, we used these recommendations drafted in the guidelines I mentioned before. As an example, the executive consulted the council before drafting laws related to the pandemic, and not just asked for our advisory opinion after drafting them, as it is prescribed by the law. We as a council consulted and took in consideration the opinions of the bars related to functioning of the courts to the functioning of the courts in this period. Every measure was published on the sites or social media pages of the council and the courts, and many of them on that common group I mentioned before. And the problems related to these measures were immediately signaled and quickly solved, even using this common group. As a conclusion or a final recommendation, I would say that every time we want to communicate something of great importance for the judiciary and the general public, we need to have a strategy with clear measures, steps to prevent undesirable outcomes. so I like to speak about prevention because this is my part, because I'm working within the council and I'm drafting communication strategies about reactions to these possible undesirable outcomes. Mark, fortunately, have already spoken. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Judge Keys. And certainly the experience of the ENCJ is a very interesting one in the work of the working group on the image of the judiciary. And it's been a pleasure to collaborate with the ENCJ in the Global Judicial Integrity Network as well. So I will now pass the floor to Judge Kim. Judge Kim, in your jurisdiction, you have described some reforms and systems which have been put in place to improve judicial efficiency and transparency. So how has the court and the judiciary studied and measured the effectiveness of these methods?
Yeah. Overall, those methods are considered a huge success. In the early days of electronic litigation system, court officials and lawyers tended to avoid using electronic litigation. That was due to kind of vague anxiety about IT technology. However, those who have once used electronic litigation system, they have become very much like electronic litigation. It was because paper documents have disappeared. The needs of carrying paper records, copying them, and serving them have disappeared. Lawyers of the parties can find out the details of the documents as soon as they were filed with the court. In the past, it took 3 days or to a week for service of those documents. But it can be possible in just a few seconds by using electronic litigation systems. Lawyers of the parties can access and read court records at any time and at anywhere. Court proceedings became much transparent. Therefore, it is sure that the public trust in electronic litigation system is a huge success in Korea. As a result, the request for the introduction of electronic litigation in criminal proceedings, which is not serviced right now, the requests are being raised very strongly these days. When the electronic litigation was first introduced in civil cases, the court officials are reluctant to work in the civil division because they don't know about the IT technology. But nowadays, the civil division has become the division that court officers most want to work with because it's very convenient and easy, and they have lots of time to rest. And on the other hand, nowadays, the divisions in charge of criminal case has become a place of reluctance to work because they have huge paper documents. They must handle those documents in the office. And the e-litigation system helps the judges and lawyers save time. They can even work at home with e-litigation system because they can easily access the documents and reference data at home. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that I think complements what our other panelists have been saying about the transparency of the information, the availability of the information, and how that helps to foster a good relationship, I think not only with the media, but also with the public in general, and potentially raising the trust in the judiciary. So I will now again pass the floor to Professor Johnston. Jane, you have studied the development of public information officers against a backdrop of a media landscape which has changed drastically through the 2000s. So can you describe some effects that these changes have had on the task of judicial outreach? And you need to unmute yourself again.
I do that every time. My students think it's hysterical. I beg your pardon, everyone. Thank you for this question, Roberta. I find this area of research quite a passion for me. I've been researching it for many years. Here we're really talking about a cultural shift, and this has been a cultural shift that's been going for now for several decades. So in Australia, the first public information officer was appointed to the then new family court in the mid-1980s, and it was a controversial court. It was set up to hear family law and parenting disputes, and that first public information officer had to manage everything communication-wise: media, outreach to linguistically diverse communities, making videos, and even managing crises. The controversy of the court resulted in several bombings, including one death of a judge's wife. So this person got typically, as we'd say, thrown in the deep end. One of the first Australian public information officers, my friend Sylvia Criven, summed up the appointment of these roles in the following way. And I'd like to also just allude to, there's a few questions that have been coming through that I think that my talk will touch on. There was a point raised by someone earlier about the media being weaponized by political forces, and that certainly was part of the rationale for bringing in public information officers into Australia. And Sylvia said, it is not often said out loud, but the creation of the position of the public information officer in Australia was in large response to the political climate of the time. Perceived attacks on judicial independence, perceived erosion of public trust through media criticisms, suggesting courts are impenetrable institutions provided over by judges who are out of touch with the community. So Sylvia's comments got to the heart of these new appointments, which are now quite commonplace in Australia, although not as commonplace in numbers as most of the courts would like, I think. I'm just going to go to my slides and just pop those up again to illustrate a couple of my points here. I'm hoping those are working for you. I have, where is it, that this point here? Yes, so I published a journal article in 2018 that actually scaffolded 3 stages of court communication and open justice. And this really features this changing media landscape. I'm just wondering where we're going here, because I might have actually... Oh, there it is there. I beg your pardon. The changing media landscape. The first is the court's openness to the news media. So that's illustrated in that old-fashioned court situation in the bottom left-hand corner. This is the historic understanding of open justice, where journalists attended courts and have done for decades, even centuries. The second of these stages is the appointment of courts' public information officers. Now, interestingly, this began in the United States in the 1930s, and there's been a gradual transition since the 1980s in Australia and the US, and also roughly since that time, or more recently in Europe and the UK. Some courts still have this role specifically for the news media, primarily to assist with accuracy and access to information. And there is some anecdotal evidence to show that accuracy has been improved. through this role. In other courts, it's also there to, the role is also there to assist the judiciary and also to focus on community outreach and engagement. The third stage is the upskilling of an enhancement of the role. So now we see enhanced levels of social media, storytelling, technology use, outreach, and so forth, more effectively and more creatively, and increasingly being able to bypass the traditional media by using in highly original ways. And that actually comes to a question that one of the other participants mentioned today, about one of the other people in the audience mentioned about finding independent court channels. And this is happening increasingly. And these are only able to happen when there's a dedicated person in the role. I'm not sure of the press officer role, but I imagine it's quite similar. My point is that you've got to have someone that can do it, that's got the smarts, that is technologically savvy, and also that whose job it is to actually communicate, not run the day-to-day running of the courts. I'd like to share a few examples, if I may, with you. When I attended the Court Public Information Officers Conference in the United States last year, which is a very large body of public information officers that get together every year, I heard some great stories about outreach. And this question really specifically speaks to the question that was raised to me, speaks to the question of outreach and what can be done. And these are just some examples of a couple of some things that are happening in the US. And I've also got some things that are happening elsewhere in the world, because I'm actually writing a book on open justice. So I've drawn from some examples there. So one court public information officer described running a rope course competition between judges and journalists. So, I mean, that's talking about getting people together in a fun environment. She said that they have to offer up what she called lens candy or photo opportunities. So they're thinking very marketing wise in that instance. Another court runs a news service so that rather than sending out press releases, they actually have ready-made news that journalists use just like they would use from Associated Press or Reuters. The rise of podcasts is big, and the courts in the US have become very connected with podcasts, but I would say also the Supreme Court of Victoria in Australia runs its own podcast. Serial is a true crime podcast that's actually been downloaded 420 million times in the last 6 years. And the third season of that was set in the Cuyahoga County Common Pleas Court in Ohio. And that's the illustration of the start of that podcast. Pardon? Okay. Slide 9. Then there's the Vogue International story about the President of the UK Supreme Court, Baroness Lady Hale, which appeared in both the January and September 2019 editions of Vogue. So that reaches over 25 million print readers and 120 million social media readers. So for those who are interested in social media, it can be a really effective tool. This is a screenshot taken from Judge Don Willett, who's probably the most prolific social media judge in the States. Now, it's interesting the way he describes himself, if you can have a quick look at that. It's about himself, his family. He's got almost 100,000 followers. He says he's fluent in legalese, but I follow him. He doesn't talk very much about the law. And he's pinned this image at the top, which is a beautiful image that he's called God Got Game. So it's a very, it's an aesthetic piece of artwork, really, if you ask me, and it's been liked 21,000 times. So the way he uses his social media is quite specific. Outreach can work to the masses. The UK Supreme Court sees about 80,000 visitors a year through the courts, or to small communities. So they have a program called Ask a Justice, which is run through a Skype session with school children. And that includes children that can't get to London. And so they set up Skype sessions with children in places like the Orkney Islands off Scotland. And then I'd say judicial outreach can come in all shapes and sizes. This is some images that were taken by the federal court when they went on country several years ago, and they sat with Indigenous communities in Outback Australia to consider land claims. And there we have Justice North walking with local communities there and sitting and talking with a member of that community. So one common denominator is that all of these experiences and outreach and engagement exercises are all, part of the job, whether it's been done just for a photo or whether it's actually integrated the actual court case into the process, generally have a facilitator, because it's not the judge's job to make the communication at that level happen. And these are usually public information officers who specialise in communication, engagement and outreach. And by the sounds of it, from what Judge Back said before, we get quite possibly the same sorts of opportunities through press judges in Europe, which I've been very interested to hear about today. Thanks very much, Roberta.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Johnston, for all of these experiences that you have been collecting in your research. It's really a wealth of information, and it's interesting to see how it's been evolving and changing as communications also evolve and change. We have some time for questions. Maybe to start now this free Q&A portion of the webinar. Maybe I'll ask one question and then we'll go into the questions from the chat. So now any of you who would like to answer it, please feel free to do so. Either raise your hand or if you're the first to unmute yourself, please go ahead. So I'll try to summarize in this question also some points that are being raised in the chat. And the question would be, what are the options for judiciaries when the press is the source of misinformation? So I think this also encapsulates some of the questions we're getting in the chat. So what to do when the press is the one that is misreporting, misinforming, either because they don't fully understand the procedures or because there are external influences or pressures to the judiciary. So what are the options in these cases? So maybe first Jane, then Judge Bax.
I think that that this is where having a person who's in a dedicated role to assist the media, the judiciary, is particularly useful. And I also think it's important that you have established the relationships so that you can go to the journalists that may be misaccurately or even vexatiously writing information, so that you've got this culture in place where you actually have got open channels of communication in place, and that it's not up to the judge to be the one to really, I think, rectify it. I think you've got to have someone who is a communication specialist. And I think this also comes to a question someone said, should press judges be former judges? Or presumably that is the case, but the PIOs are all communication or media specialists, and some of them have legal training as well, but they are communication specialists, and I think there's increasingly a job for them in the courts.
Thank you. Judge Bax?
Well, I think you should, if it's a real essential point of factual misinformation, then you should react. You should not react if someone finds your verdict or ruling not good or something. That's we're only here to give factual information, and if the factual information is incorrect, then you can try to correct it. Perhaps via a press judge, or perhaps via a communications officer. But when it is malicious and when it's intentional, you can still try to correct it, perhaps via your own channels on Facebook, on Twitter. And if that doesn't work, we have a council for journalism in the Netherlands where you can file a complaint against a journalist. It has been done once or twice in the past, but well, our experiences are that when factual misinformation is spread around and you correct it, you try to correct it by connecting to the journalist, it will be corrected. But that's only the case if you have a good relationship with that journalist. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That's a very interesting point, and that's also what we have in terms of the international standards of judicial conduct. That's also the guidance that we have under the Bangalore principles, what you and Professor Johnson just mentioned. But we have an interesting question also here in the chat about the courts themselves using technology to communicate. So let me just read this and then you can decide who would like to answer. So how much can a well-organized e-government technology substitute a close relationship with the media? So if the goal is to communicate more with the public while upholding judicial independence, should the judiciary possess independent communication channels and platforms? So anyone would like to take that one? Jane, yeah.
Yeah. This is really the third stage of my three-stage platforms, I suppose. And this is really becoming, moving into what we call in media, developing owned media. So where your own media, whether that's streaming services or whether it's a website, which everybody has now, but streaming is becoming much more popular through the courts. So either audio or video streaming, podcasts that courts are actually developing themselves, telling their own stories. Courts are becoming, certainly in Australia and America, much more proactive about using their own channels. As I said before, there's even a court in Ohio that has a news service, and all the legal magazines and journals go to that news service. So I think that this is a point in time where the notion of the media has now burgeoned, and it's no longer just the news media. It's a whole lot of different sorts of media, and owned media, I think, is a really important pathway or series of pathways for courts to be developing, even to the point of having court TV that is run out of different courts. As we know, Roberta, it exists in some countries, in some jurisdictions in the US.
But would you maybe suggest that courts develop something completely new instead of using an existing platform, that they develop something completely new? I think the question relates also to maybe creating information bubbles with the judiciary and echo chambers that might also be a risk.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I guess the judges would have to comment more closely on that. I'm talking more, I suppose, about courts more broadly.
Good. Judge Bax?
Well, just an interesting observation is when you own media, when you own a press platform, how far can you then say it's an independent press?
Yes, that's a very good point. Then we go into not only the independence of the judiciary, but also the independence of the media and the channels. I think especially you, Judge Bax, touched upon a conference that your judiciary organizes to also educate the journalists, the media on how the judiciary operates.
Yeah.
So maybe one next question to all of the panelists would be, so in addition to ethics trainings to judges so they know how to handle such situations, what other types of trainings would you recommend on these various issues, maybe on new court technologies or on communications, either to the judges or also to media? So maybe first Judge Keys and then Judge Kim. Andrea?
My answer would be definitely legal soft skills. We need them in the law faculties and in the judicial schools as well. In Romania, we have some courses, but we have also a project. You can find it on YouTube. Legal soft skills in Romania. So definitely legal soft skills. In this way, we can develop our possibilities for building healthy relationships with everyone, including the press.
Judge Kim?
I think the best way is to have the judicial trainee judges directly observe the real trial using the new court technologies. I have experienced some of my colleagues come to my courtroom and watch my remote video technology trials. And I think the next way is through mock trials, practice trials using the new court technologies. It's the best. It's the second way of the practice.
Good, thank you. So a lot of opportunities then for training and also as a way to bring the press and journalists closer to the realities of the judiciary. So I think it's, as you all mentioned, it's important that the judges know how to use the systems, but also the public and the media. So that's a very interesting point as well. Unfortunately, we are reaching the end of our session. It's been really interesting discussion, and we will definitely continue to discuss this topic in the Global Judicial Integrity Network. So we will also collect all the questions in the chat and maybe send those to our panelists and also use that as input for our work in the network moving forward on this topic. So I would like now to thank our panelists for a really fantastic session. You brought a wealth of information and experience that will leave us thinking for quite some time on how the network can assist judiciaries with the challenges of communications, how to continue to provide assistance and maybe additional resources that we could help judiciaries develop. I also thank the audience members who have joined us today throughout the world. Maybe a special thanks to Judge Hyun-Do Kim and to Professor Jane Johnson, who are now actually in the future. They are on Thursday already with us because of the time difference. Thank you for joining us from the future. And also we would like to thank the organizers of the IACC and the hosts of the Republic of Korea. This session was on the website of the Global Judicial Integrity Network as soon as possible. The link to the website of the network is provided here in the chat. And I invite you to visit, look over the recordings of our previous webinars, and to sign up to access the restricted area of the website for exclusive content of the network. As I mentioned also in the beginning of the session, the Global Judicial Integrity Network was created in order to serve the needs of judges and judiciaries regarding international standards of judicial ethics and integrity. And alongside with these efforts, I hope that everyone can leave this session with new insights into how judicial communication can improve the openness of the institution while actively strengthening its resilience against forces which may seek to discredit the work of the judiciary. As you have heard from our speakers, the success of judicial communication and outreach relies heavily on being adaptable to new technologies and understanding the potential of all communication platforms, including now social media. Trust and strong working relationships between the judiciary and the media will ensure that at the minimum, accurate information about the work of the courts is being communicated to dedicated channels. And beyond this, the judiciary and the media can seek innovative ways to further their shared goal of serving the public. So we'll continue to explore this topic as a branch of the network's work plan, and we invite you to stay in touch with us to follow and participate in our future events. Thank you all again so much, and we hope to see you soon again in another webinar of the Global Judicial Integrity Network. Thank you so much.